Welcome everyone to the AJA weekly Zoom event. We've got a very special event for you tonight. Special guest as well will be known to some people. Just before we start, just a reminder, there will be time for questions. So if you have a question, the best thing to do is to raise your hand with the raise your hand button, and we will come to you in the second half. I want to welcome all the people. As everyone knows, we stream across many different platforms. We have people watching on Zoom, on Facebook, on JA Community Radio, people listening to the recording on YouTube. So a lot of people here. Tonight we'll be hearing from the AJA president, Dr. David Adler. Some of you will be familiar with him from these type of events, but as he was just saying before, in almost 10 years of AJA, he's never been invited to be the guest speaker. So it's a very special event, and he'll be speaking about his trip, which he has just returned from last night in Israel. He was invited to a very special conference. So we will give it over to David to lead tonight's session.
Okay, thank you very much. And what I'm going to do, hopefully, is share a PowerPoint. And let's see if you've got, it should go from full screen. There we are. Does that look all right? Can someone tell me if you can see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's looking good, David.
Okay, thanks so much. All right. As Robert said, almost 10 years of AJA. This is actually the first event on Zoom that I'm doing. I've put together a whole category of photographs, and I'll explain the trip with visual illustrations. It was terrific to be invited by the Israeli government, and when we got there, they designated us ambassadors of truth. And that's a really good slogan. It's a really good mission to have. So what I'm going to do is I've broken the structure of the presentation into 4 categories. The first is to have a look at southern Israel, obviously the area where the October 7 terrorism occurred. There's a particular personal connection which I'll explain and hopefully will be of interest and illustrates more generally the impact of October 7. And we have some insights into the civil security enhancement which is occurring in southern Israel. We'll then talk a little bit about Yehuda and Shomron. We went in there, we met with some of the leaders, also a little bit about Jerusalem in the second part. Then turn to the Israel government anti-Semitism summit and some interesting people and interesting things that happened at the summit. And then I was fortunate to have private briefing meetings with 5 members of the Knesset. I'll show you who they are and talk a little bit about that as well. So here's starting with October 7 and the personal connection. A few of you might have seen this before. This is a funeral notice of one of the victims. The young woman is my cousin. Her name is Maya Biton. And you can see that the date of this down the bottom is the 10th of October. Her body was found and a funeral proceeded quite quickly. And the line at the top in Hebrew is Netzachol b'dam kar, murdered in cold blood. The guy in the photo, Eliran Mizrahi, was her fiance. So one of the places we went was to the Nova site, and you can see the little memorials to each of the victims on the Nova site, and we found the 2 of those who had sort of together at the Nova site, and obviously standing next to that. And there's a sort of a bit of a biography on each of them on those those signs. But then we found out a lot more information about how they died and what happened. And if ever you go down there, there is the story of the two large yellow dumpsters. Now, we won't read the story. This is one of the signs down at the Nova site. And with the music festival, there were large skip bins, we would call them. The Americans call them dumpsters, where all the catering rubbish and other things would be thrown. Why is that significant? Well, here's the perspective of the site. You can see in the top photograph towards the bottom left-hand corner, the two large yellow dumpsters. This was where some of the attendees at the Nova Festival hid under the rubbish until they were found by the Hamas terrorists. And amongst the people hiding there were my cousin and her fiance. So that's her picture, the same as on the funeral notice. And again, we won't go through the detail, but what appears there is the text messages recovered from her phone. So these are, if you like, the final words of some of the victims when their phone messages were recovered. This is in Hebrew. They had a QR code where you could obtain translations to all the text messages. So I have here the conversations between Maya and other members of the family, talking about praying and hiding and can you hear gunshots, advice to stay there, don't move. And of course, it took some hours for the group that was hiding in the yellow dumpster bins to be discovered, and they were shot. But I mean, it's just extraordinary that we have the last thoughts, the last words of some of the victims. As we were driving around, everyone knows that bus shelters are also bomb shelters. This is one in southern Israel. Many stickers put on, some related to the victims, some just other messages. This is from the outside. And as you go inside, this is what you see. And I want to point out that you can see on the roof lots of shrapnel marks. You can see many shrapnel marks on the right side of the wall. But if you look around the corner and the lower part here, there are very few shrapnel marks. And the explanation for that is that that's where a group of the victims cowered, hid, until Hamas terrorists threw grenades into that bus shelter. So the shrapnel that you see on the top and on this side of the wall, but not here, was actually absorbed by Jewish bodies killed in this bus shelter. I should have warned perhaps that some of the content is fairly confronting stuff. We then proceeded to Eshkol. Eshkol is the region at the most, I guess, the corner of Israel, and it has, it's the regional council that has a border with Gaza and a border with Egypt. So it's the most southerly, westerly part of Israel, and within it are the kibbutzim that were overrun. So Be'er is up the sort of, it's hard to read with the small writing, but I think that's Be'er. Near Oz is here, and a number of the kibbutzim along here were attacked by the Hamas terrorists on October 7. So we had the good fortune to meet with the Eshkol Regional Council, and specifically with this man, Ilan Isaacson, who's the head of security and emergency services. And he gave us a briefing on the security challenges post-October 7. And to be perfectly honest, he said, the communities have lost confidence in the IDF. So what are they doing about it? They are undertaking a fairly rigorous form of civil security, and I'll show you an example of that next. This particular group of people training are not the IDF. These are civilians. These are residents of the kibbutzim. We went to the shooting range where they are training, and spoke to a number of them, spoke to the instructors, and although they look like IDF, they're not. And this is all about enhancing on a 24/7 basis the preparedness of the southern communities to confront any future terrorism threat, to be able to repel any future terrorism threat if, God forbid, there's another infiltration. I'm not showing it now, but we also went to a kibbutz which did have successful defence, kibbutz Magen. Interesting name for a kibbutz that successfully defended itself. And we stood there overlooking the land to the Gaza border, and they described how the terrorists were coming towards them, and fortunately they had sufficient weapons to repel them, and Kibbutz Magen only lost 2 of its people on October 7. I mean, it's still a tragedy, but far less than some of the other kibbutzim. We now switch gear, and there's my wife Ailey showing us some aspects of the Shomron. The Shomron, of course, is the biblical heartland of Israel, and some say that's where all our methods of prayer originated, with Hannah's prayer in Shiloh to the Kohen Gadol at the time, Eli, and Ailey went over. Ailey, whose name is significant to that site, went over and recited Hannah's prayer for the benefit of some of our family members, and the second photo shows her overlooking, well, the background overlooks the beautiful area of the Shomron and the rolling hills in the background. Anybody who advocates giving up this area for some state of Palestine is no friend of mine. Had the good fortune to meet Yossi Dagan and had a good chat with him. We are working on a project with Yossi to send some Australians to the Shomron to understand the significance of the area, and he will play a part in that. Great guy, highly principled. There are many people who want him dead, but interestingly, on that day, there was not a lot of visible security. This guy's got guts, and he's on a mission to build Jewish life in Yehuda and Shomron. There are currently about 500,000. He thinks there should be 1 million in the area, and he's doing what he can to facilitate that. Okay, every guy who goes to Israel, of course, should do something like this. And that's my little effort. The eternal undivided capital of Israel, of course. Now, showing you this particular view of the old city, it's an interesting view. You can obviously see the Dome of the Rock, and just further back and to the right, somewhere around here, is the actual Al-Aqsa. Down there on that rooftop is a guy, you can just see the top of him. That's Daniel Luria of Ateret Kohanim. And this is one of the tallest buildings in the old city, and it has been redeemed. It's now occupied by Jewish families. And that's me with Daniel. Sometimes people ask us where they can make donations that really support good causes in Israel. I tend not to favour the large bureaucratic organisations, but one that I would certainly recommend is Ateret Kohanim. Their whole mission is about building Jewish life in Israel. And Daniel, of course, has been a previous AJA event guest, and doing fantastic work in Jerusalem, really frontline stuff. We then moved to the conference, and we were in the conference centre, and just before it started, a couple of ballistic missiles from Yemen are flying overhead. I'm not sure how clear that is, but that's the smoke trails of the 2 ballistic missiles circled in red. In the conference centre, we were all instructed to take shelter. There is a bomb shelter underneath, but also people just sat down against solid walls in the inside of the centre. None of us, well, certainly we didn't feel at risk at all. It was just part of the entertainment, really. Israel took out those ballistic missiles with no ill effect other than some debris falling down in a couple of places. A little about the people you bump into at this conference, and I'm just showing you a short selection. Mordechai Gadar, Matt Brooks is the CEO of the Republican Jewish Coalition. Natasha Hasdorf, who heads UK Lawyers for Israel. Lital Shemesh, and the woman that I'm with down the bottom is one of the representatives from the EU, who some ridiculous people decided to avoid, or ridiculous decision. Her name's something like Maria Veronico. and I hope to have her as a future AJA event guest. She's accepted in principle. One of the outstanding contributions at the conference came from her. Really a terrific speaker, and at the end of a particular session, I went up to her and said, I thought her contribution was the best, and would she speak to an Australian Jewish group, and hopefully we'll be able to get that together. More people, Itamar Marcus from Palestinian Media Watch, Professor Gerard Steinberg from Honest Reporting, Mark Zell, who's the, I guess, the representative of the Republicans in Israel, Hillel Fuld, Natan Sharansky. I mean, I could go on, but I just want you to have the impression that it really was an extraordinary gathering, privileged to be there, and to make a bit of a contribution to the proceedings as well. So my contribution was in a closed session, which was good. It suited me because I could say things that were not going to be reported by media. And basically, the structure of my presentation is listed there in dot points. For those that didn't know what AJA was and what we'd done and the growth, and being by far the largest Jewish platform that the Australian Jewish community has ever seen, I provided an update, obviously explained how Australia has changed since October 7 in a number of respects. The attitude of the Labor government I described as the most hostile government in my lifetime. And I'm born in Australia, so that covers, unfortunately, quite a lot of years. And that it seems to be fueled by far left principles, that it's more interested in votes from certain areas where Muslim communities are significant rather than doing the right thing. Went on to describe the 4 sources of anti-Semitism that have increased in Australia, identifying those 4 as Islamic anti-Semitism, as the political left, as a group of neo-Nazis which have emerged, and we have seen them become more active in just the last few months. So we are mainly on social media, but there are signs that a couple of minor parties might be vulnerable to neo-Nazi influence, and I'm sorry to say that, but we have come across a little bit of concern. And finally, and importantly, the 4th area that I raised and actually emphasised was the Jewish anti-Semitism. That it seems worldwide that the strategy to date has been to ignore the anti-Zionist, often crossing the line into anti-Semitic Jews. And I don't think that's the right strategy. And I said that we need to collaborate and do something better for that, because although we might think that they're a very small fraction of the Jewish community, and that's correct, of course, they are being platformed by media, and the other 3 categories are using them to legitimise their own anti-Semitism. So I think I was the first in the conference to raise that particular problem. In terms of actions and strategies that are recommended, I believe very strongly that there is no two-state solution, and if there were any fence sitters, then October 7 had to drag them off the fence. In Israel, the Knesset voted roughly 80-9 against a two-state solution. The only 9 in favour were the Arab parties. A couple of the left-wing members of the Knesset walked out and didn't vote, so they abstained. But I explained an additional reason, and that is that if it's continued to be discussed, then really you're offering something that you know is not going to be delivered. And even though it's been offered multiple times, and even though the Arabs are the ones who have repeatedly rejected it, it will be Israel and the Jews that are blamed for the failure. Nobody wants it in Israel. Almost nobody wants it in Israel. The Jews don't want it. The government doesn't want it. The Arabs, even in Gaza and Yehuda and Shomron, don't want it, but for the opposite reasons. And the only place that it lives is in the heads of certain politicians, and I regret to say, certain Jewish community leaders. Alan Dershowitz has been highly critical of some of our Jewish organisations at the moment, and including our failure to deal with the anti-Semitic Jews, which he describes as the worst problem. I said we need to be clearer on terminology. Language is important, and if you're using terms like Palestinian and West Bank and advocating a two-state solution, you might as well be wearing a keffiyeh. Gave that message at the conference. And of course, I mentioned before the need for a strategy of dealing with the anti-Semitic Jews. So that, in essence, was my contribution to the conference. Ooh, sorry. Just had a little bit of a glitch on the PowerPoint. Why is it not going back? My PowerPoint's stuck. I might... okay, looks like this is going to be a bit random. We had a number of private meetings with Knesset members. This is one of them, Simcha Rockman. Very good guy. Now my computer's frozen. Alan, is it still okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We're looking at a picture of you and Simcha Rotman.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe while you update your computer,
Yeah.
and while that's happening, I'll just let everyone know that's watching. We will, for everyone who's been watching AJA emails and seeing these places and wants to visit, AJA will be having a trip to Israel later this year. We've got expressions of interest, so Tennille can see who's interested. It's no commitment necessary at this stage, so keep an eye out for that, and more details will come in the future. But yeah, some of the places we're seeing today, and even some of the people we're seeing today, you will have your chance to see.
Yeah, unfortunately, there seems to be the PowerPoint seems to have crashed for some reason. I'll try to, no, won't even restart. Okay, what I'll do is I'll finish off because we're close to halfway, and I'll just explain without the aid of the pictures that there were a whole range of really interesting meetings that we had subsequently. You got to see the picture with Simcha Rotman, who heads the efforts for judicial reform in Israel. There were also meetings with Minister Amichai Chikli and his policy advisor, Tuvia Cherlock. Excellent people. We met with Ohad Tal, who's the chairman of the Australia-Israel Friendship Group in the Knesset, Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell, who really strongly on side, gave them all briefings, and Minister Ze'ev Elkin, whose responsibilities include the reconstruction of Jewish communities in the south and the north. So apologies that one of the programs seems to have frozen or crashed, but all in all, sometimes you come away from Israel thinking, wow, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and certainly the visit that we had for the last 8 days falls into that category. So thank you, Robert. Just over halfway, so all good.
Perfect. So, yeah, reminder to everyone, raise your hands if you've got a question. I can see a lot of questions in the chat, but always better if you want to ask it in person. So we will go to some questions very shortly. I will just say that it looks like an amazing trip and amazing people David's met. And what's interesting is that of those people, almost all of them have been previous AJA guests. I think 4 of the 5 members of Knesset you met, as well as many of the other speakers, like Gerard and Natasha Hausdorff and so many of them. So AJA is mixing in the right circles, looks amazing. I think maybe you'll give us an update about next week, and then we'll go to some questions.
Okay, well, while we were waiting to start, I suggested that our guest next week might trigger some leftists. You never know. We will be focusing on our ongoing election series, and we will be looking at the political party of One Nation. And joining us next week will be Senator Pauline Hanson, plus the lead Senate candidate for South Australia, Jennifer Game. Of all the states, One Nation has a chance of getting an additional senator. It is South Australia because they have a state member there who's been performing very well, and so the brand has been enhanced. So Pauline Hanson and Jennifer Game next week.
Amazing. Looks very good. All right. Well, let's go to the first question with Alan Friedman.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks, David, for a great presentation. I wonder, can you just tell us a little bit about the delegates that were there? Who were they? What sort of people? How many of them? And were there any other Australians there?
Sure. The last question is the simplest, because in addition to Ailey and me, Alon Kasuto, the CEO of the Zionist Federation of Australia, was there, ZFA, and that was it. It was a large conference. It would have had, my estimate, 600 to 800 people in all. It filled a very large hall. There were different sections of it, and a lot of activists. I mean, I could have gone on and on mentioning the various names that were there. A lot of the senior members of the Israeli government turned up, not necessarily for the whole conference, but for parts of it. Gideon Saar, the foreign minister, was there, and as you know, because it was in the media in the lead up to the conference, a number of parliamentarians, politicians from Europe attended, including those that were described as far right. But what we saw was that they spoke in a highly principled way in support of Israel, in opposition of anti-Semitism, in support of the Jewish community. Doesn't mean that we have to not be cautious about some of them, but from what I saw, and I got to speak face to face with a few, they were not as portrayed in the general media. So that's a quick overview, Alan, but it was a big conference. When I had my private meeting with the Minister for Diaspora and Combating Anti-Semitism, Amichai Chikli, I suggested to him that because it was so successful and because anti-Semitism doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, that he should consider making it an annual event. And he took that on board, and we'll see if there's another one next year.
Can I just ask you, David, did they know much about Australia and our situation? I'm just thinking that
Yes.
Shari's been there and Bolt. I mean, how much do they know of what's happening here?
In general terms, they know a lot, because partly because of AJA and things like the Opera House videos that we released went worldwide, and many of them have seen that. Many of them have seen media that things have deteriorated a lot in Australia. So the big events that seem to have general knowledge was what happened at the Opera House and the burning down of the Adass synagogue. A lot of people knew about that. Some of them took more interest in Australia, knew we were about to have an election, knew we had a bad government. But at least in general terms, they were aware that things have turned in Australia.
And next up, we have Michael.
You're muted, Michael, if you're...
Yeah. Hi, David. Look, firstly, I'm glad that you were invited to go to the conference, because I think you would be the most suitable of all of our Jewish representatives, because you're quite open and truthful. What I wanted to know is, before the conference, there was a bit of controversy about some participants not going, like the chief rabbi of UK. I think the Jewish German leader of the Jewish community. What was the end result of some of those high profile Jews boycotting the conference? And the second question is, did the conference get much coverage within Israel itself?
Yeah. Well, frankly, they did themselves a disservice, Michael. The conference was a tremendous success, and their absence was not noticed on the day. There were plenty of very solid presentations, useful discussion, and a lot of networking and collaboration between the people there. So I think those that did not attend have frankly shot themselves in the foot, as well as doing the community a disservice. Judaism is not about cancel culture. But yes, it got a fair bit of publicity, both before and after the conference. So before the conference, having someone with the profile of Rabbi Mervis pull out, as well as a handful of others, meant that there were investigative journalists who looked at it, who could look at backgrounds and histories and things, and write articles about it. And I was given a copy of the Jerusalem Post as soon as I arrived, before the conference, a day or two before the conference, and there were pages of coverage on the conference. It was live streamed by I-24, which I think is one of the Israel TV stations. And I don't know how much follow-up coverage it got, but it got a fair bit before and during the conference. And most of the high-profile people in Israel made an appearance.
Okay, next up we have Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
Can you hear me?
Can now.
Look, I just wanted to say briefly, I had the privilege of visiting Israel last month to visit a friend of mine we've been writing for the last 44 years since we were in high school, and we've only just got to meet last month. So that was something. But one thing you might find amusing, given the love lost between AJA and the ABC, is that at the Yad Vashem bookshop, the lady at the bookshop let on that she had been a babysitter for the ABC journalists' families posted to Jerusalem. I just looked at her and I said, the ABC does not speak for all Australians. She smiled and said, I know exactly what you mean. I'll just leave that one right there.
Yeah. We have a major problem with public broadcasting. All I can say about that is that Robert and I have raised it with senior coalition people that should they become government after May 3rd, they really need to do something with ABC and SBS. We're hoping they will have the opportunity and the backbone to do something, but time will tell.
And there's actually been in the news today something on that Peter Dutton was saying. I think more talking about cutting waste at the ABC if the coalition's elected. So yes, he's definitely one of the people we have spoken about this issue with. Next up, we have Catherine.
I've unmuted. Can I just ask, where have you gone? Dr. Adler, to which minor parties were you referring in particular? I'll put my hand up. I'm not Jewish, I'm just supportive. Okay, so, but I'm actually even at the point where I'm being asked myself, are you Jewish? Because you seem to be supporting Israel. So, and I've even said to people, well, yeah, look, I've got some Ashkenazi, but I don't want to tell anybody because I'm scared of what they'll do. And I'm sure it must be so much more terrifying for people that are Jewish.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that's more of a comment probably about that. But thank you, for your support. And next up, we have Dina.
Wonderful opportunity and more to come. Thank you, David. I find it very disconcerting that presumably neutral avenues of media, such as the Times of Israel, are depicting a very polarized society in Israel. What was your experience of the state of affairs?
Yeah. Dina, there's a difference between the media and the general population there, for sure. Now, we did see in two locations some anti-government protesters, and these are the people who are not anti-Israel, but they have a problem with the government strategy. They might not like the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. They hold up posters of the hostages, and their message is stop the war. We need to get the hostages out by negotiation and ceasefire. So there is still a group that thinks that there might be a reasonable way of dealing with Hamas without smashing them. But they're the minority. They are noisy. If you go to the Knesset, you will see in Kaplan Street, which is about 150, 200 metres from the entrance to the Knesset, a small group there every day. And once or twice while we were there were street protests, mucking up traffic. But when you're talking to people in cafes, in hotels, in the proverbial taxi cabs, there's no disunity. Everybody wants a comprehensive Israeli victory. They're concerned about the security. They don't want to live under the threat of terrorism. The vast majority of people we came across, and given we're in Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv might be a little bit different, but in Jerusalem, they're centre-right or conservative. They're very concerned about that. They're not at all thinking about the woke issues that drive some of our politics here. So, yeah, there's a little bit of noise in the media. There's some small protests on the street, but my impression is that your middle, average, grassroots Israelis are very united in the mission. They're very supportive of the IDF. They're very concerned about security. They want peace. They want to get on with their lives.
Thank you, Dina. And you mentioned Times of Israel was where you're seeing the disunity. I wouldn't say that's a neutral news source. It's quite left-wing. They do a very good job of covering the news, but they are definitely a left-wing media outlet compared to some of the other English media from Israel. Next up, we have Hazel.
Hi, David. That was really interesting. And I'm really curious, were there any references or discussion about the Gaza Riviera or what is going to happen in Gaza? You know, in relation to once the war is hopefully over.
That wasn't really the subject of the conference, Hazel. The conference subject was about combating anti-Semitism, and it was an international conference. And look, Israel feels a sense of responsibility for Jews worldwide. And it wasn't really that dealing with the hard political issue of what to do with Gaza after the war. I mean, there was a little bit of sideline discussion about that, of course, because the conflict is in everybody's mind and in the news every day. But that wasn't the subject. So I don't have. I mean, we asked a few people whether they thought Trump's relocation plan was a fantasy or whether it might happen. And truth is, I still don't know. But I did tell a couple of the members of the Knesset a sort of a joke with a message, and it depends on two conditions. One is it depends on Trump's relocation plan being possible, and secondly, God forbid we should get a Labor, Greens, Teals government after May 3. But if we're in that scenario, I said to them, well, what we need to do is to build a new luxury Australian Anglo community in northern Gaza, improve the road into Israel proper. You know, Trump's a developer, great, develop it, and then ship all the Gazans to Australia. Win-win. And yeah, they reacted like you, and they just had a good laugh. But yeah, there's a bit of a serious message behind that joke.
I think there'll be some anti-Semites who'll take that joke seriously.
Good.
We've had a written question here about the Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's speech. What did he speak about? How was it received? Was that one of the highlights?
Yeah, Bibi's a superb speaker. He spoke for maybe 15 minutes. Somebody asked me if he hung around, but no, he came in, gave his speech and left, and security for him to even do that was You know, you've never seen anything like it. At least 6 bodyguards that I could count. But he spoke about you know, Israel's role in supporting the diaspora. He did speak a bit about the conflict and how on October 7 there were 251 hostages taken. There are now approximately 59 in Gaza, and he pointed out that they were actually successful in getting the majority out alive. So, I mean, even though the process has been criticised, when you look at the big picture, he was saying they've been reasonably successful. But his speech is available on video as well as transcript, and you've just got to Google it, and you can access it. I think we have a video of Bibi's speech, and if there's sufficient interest, we can you know, include a link in the next email. Might do that.
That's good. Next up, we have Ash.
Good evening, Dr. Adler and all. How are particularly the children of Israel, the families and broader community, are they getting support and recovering in that sense, feeling safe? Please excuse my Aussie accent, but they're like the kibbutz and the areas most affected, and that, are they rebuilding in a sense of community and families and stuff like that?
It's a mixed picture, Ash, and it would be misleading to say all is okay. There are some communities which are a long way from recovery. When we were down south, you know, a couple of the kibbutzim have been, you know, largely destroyed, but reconstruction has commenced. We went past one where maybe you know, 15 white houses we could see were under construction, brand new. Some communities have returned and some have not. And that applies to the north as well, where there was the bombardment from Hezbollah for a while. I can't imagine the psychological impact on young children. And Israel has obviously a bunch of orphans and a bunch of traumatized children. We didn't really get to talk to many directly, but you know, schools are functioning. Most of the activities are back to normal, but there are communities in both the south and the north that have not returned to normal, and it's probably going to be a couple of years from now until they do.
Okay, next up we have Michael.
Thank you. You very correctly noted the problem we've got with the news channels. However, one of the issues associated with this, I'm not sure if everyone's aware or not, but as recently as 4 years ago, a letter was signed by over 1,000 journalists, including one Cohen, one Isaacs, 11, and also Dan Ilan, who is Zoe Daniels' campaign manager, decrying settler violence and basically everything, complete Hamas line of these terrible Israelis, how they're being so vicious to the entire Jewish community. If there's, how do we re-educate the journalists who are the ones who are diseducating the community? And have we missed that boat?
Yeah, tough one. I'll tell you one statistic I heard recently, and it illustrates how the force of numbers is against us. A lot of the young people get their information not just from journalists, but from some of the social media that I guess many of us wouldn't watch, like TikTok. And for every pro-Israel video, it has been estimated that there are 54 anti-Israel videos. So we're outnumbered 54 to 1. We have a lot of good people on our side, and it needs the right leadership, Ash, in my view. I mean, I've given a lot of thought as to whether Australia can be turned around, and or whether some things that we have now in place are not reversible. And maybe with the right leadership, some things can be turned around. But I think this is a battle that is not just ours, and that's the key to it, that we happen to be at the front edge of what's called the long march of the left through the institutions. And you see it in the universities, and you see it in the media, and you see it in the arts. And there is a swing in some countries to restore sanity. We've obviously seen a big swing happen in the United States from a Biden-type administration to a Trump-type administration. The polling in the UK at the moment shows a big swing. There has been some swings in a number of European countries. And I think that's the key to it, that we have to do everything we can with as many allies as we can muster. And it's one of the reasons why those who decided to boycott this conference are frankly politically naive. You can form alliances. You can, you know, if somebody comes from an organisation that might have a bad history at the time of World War II, and now in 2025 they show interest in Israel and show interest in combating anti-Semitism, we should assist with their education so that they can be constructive allies. So I think that's the key to it. The Jewish people are such a small proportion that we're not going to win the numbers game. So we've got to form alliances, political alliances, alliance with Christian organisations, alliance with conservative organisations, so this can be properly fought.
Thank you, Dr. Adler. I think those are all very sound strategies. These are some issues AJ is working on. And just, Michael, you mentioned that the letter that someone working for Zoe Daniels signed that letter. Well, she actually signed that letter herself. She was one of the signatories, and AJ called it out at the time. But thank you so much, Dr. Adler, for this incredible presentation. It really feels like we're all there in Israel. I'm sure a lot of people will be joining the AJA trip later in the year. For those, if anyone's not yet subscribed to AJA emails or hasn't yet given a donation recently, or wants to hear more about the trip, or wants to receive the recording of this this particular talk, make sure you are subscribed at jewishassociation.org.au, where you can subscribe to AJA emails, and you can do various other things, and you'll be provided in the next email with a recording of this particular Zoom, which you can share with all your friends and all your family and acquaintances and whoever you like. But thank you again, Dr. Adler. We're all very privileged to hear about this conference you're able to speak at, things you got to experience. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We look forward to seeing everyone next week with Pauline Hanson and Jennifer Game, who could well be a new Jewish senator from South Australia. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Any last words?
No, I think you've summarised it really well. There's a lot more that could be said, but time's up. So we've just got to continue advocacy, the support of the Jewish community, the support of Israel. And I'll just make the observation that the 5 Knesset members that I had private meetings with were all good people and all very appreciative of the work of AJA. You know, the complexion in Israel is different to the complexion in Australia. And I don't know if you saw her in the photo I showed with Ailey, she was wearing a CPAP cap. And just about everywhere she went, she was being told, "Oh, CPAC, that's great. We love CPAC." So it made a positive impression. That's where Israel is at. And unfortunately, we have Jewish organisations in Australia that are not doing the cause a good service at the moment. And I told all of them that they have a strong ally in AJA.